All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the current state of the general election. There are two interesting facts, some new numbers that I want to point out for you. So first, we have political polls reporting on a new CNN poll, and look at these numbers. Trump, 52%, Biden, 45%, and that's in all of these states. You ready? Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, ME. Is that Maine? I think that's Maine, but I actually don't know. Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Mexico, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Wisconsin. So Trump is leading in all of those massively important states, which does not bode well for Joe Biden. Another fact that does not bode well for Joe Biden is something that we discussed on the show a little while ago now, but I think it's still relevant, and I think the numbers are still probably roughly the same, which is the enthusiasm gap. You remember that story? How Trump's supporters are way more enthusiastic to vote for him. Like, they love him. Whereas Biden's supporters really just, like, tolerate him and view him as like, yeah, okay, I guess this guy. So will that manifest on Election Day? It's possible. It's possible that some people who are not so head over heels for Joe Biden are just like, man, I'm just going to sit it out. Whereas with Trump, his people are not going to sit it out, not at all. So that is an interesting data point in Trump's favor. Now, I will say, I have seen a decent number of polls that show the opposite, that show Biden doing well in some of these swing states, and relatively consistently as well. I think I've seen more polls with Biden doing well in swing states than I've seen these new polls with Trump doing well in the swing states. And also, you know, Biden, when you look at the race from a national perspective, he has a 4 to 5 point lead on Trump. Now, you could say that bodes well for Biden as well, and it does. However, you know, at this point in the race in 2016, Hillary had like a 7 to a 9 point lead on Trump. So Biden's lead at this point versus Hillary's is smaller. But then there's the other mitigating factor, which is in 2016, we weren't dealing with COVID-19 and an economic depression. Now we are dealing with COVID-19 and an economic depression. And I told you guys before, the most important factor in this election is going to be where we are in the time frame. Because when there's a crisis like this, as a general rule, the country falls behind our leaders and we support them. It's what happened after 9/11. Bush had like an 80% approval rating after 9/11. So Trump got that bump. He was briefly over 50%. He wasn't over it previously in his entire time in office, but he was briefly over 50%. You know, he's hanging on in that ballpark now, maybe 45-ish, 46, somewhere around there. But either by the time Election Day comes, people are still feeling that sense of patriotism about how we have a crisis and you don't change your leader in the middle of a crisis, and they fall in line in that sense. Or if the crisis has been going on for too long and the unemployment rate is too high and people are feeling too much pain and COVID-19 is still ripping through the country, it could be an election where it's like, hey, anything but the guy we have now, where that initial feeling of patriotism in the midst of a crisis, at some point that wears off when the crisis doesn't go away and people are like, we got to change stuff. We got to fix stuff. And so it's possible, you know, when the election comes, we'll be at a time and place where that initial feeling of falling in line behind your leader in a crisis, it wears off, and now people are in the just change whoever the hell's in their mood. So now, one more fact I want to show you is voters over 65 years old. So this is really interesting. In the 2016 exit polls, Trump won 52% of the voters over 65 years old. Clinton won 45%. In 2020, Biden has 57% of those voters. Trump has 42% of those voters. So Biden has the old in a way that Hillary did not have them. Did not have them. See, this gets to a point that I've made on this show for a while, which is, it is very possible that we're about to see a very unique election historically, where the young people just really don't matter that much. Where, like in the 2008 coalition, Obama coalition, young people were so important. They were a huge part of that. But what we're looking at right now is a situation where in 2020, it's just a race of like competing factions of older people. You know, and when I say younger voters might not matter that much, I mean not just the millennial generation. I also mean a lot of the Gen Xers who are not really young, but like a lot of the Gen Xers might not matter in this election either. I think that the turnout will be overwhelming among the older people in this election, and you're really battling it out over, you know, who will get the biggest chunk of the older portion of the electorate, because that's what this Democratic primary showed. You know, Bernie was banking on a surge of like young people, outsiders, people who felt left behind by the political system, and he was banking on a surge of those people. That's what his campaign was geared towards. What really happened was a surge of the MSNBC, CNN crowd, a surge of the professional class suburbia people who are up there in age. And that was a Biden contingent all the way. So now typically older voters are more Republican leaning than Democratic leaning. But if this trend holds, Biden could flip the older voters more Democratic. And then it's a whole new ballgame, a whole new election map. And young people in this cycle, at least, can be somewhat irrelevant. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. There's so much about politics that's not predictable. You can predict some stuff based on older trends and, you know, old dynamics, but sometimes the things are just unpredictable. So I don't know. I'm very interested to see. It's funny how every time I look into this election, try to figure out what's going to happen, I get smacked in the face with competing data points. It's always like, ooh, that's a good point in Trump's direction. Ooh, that's a good point in Biden's direction. And all I have to say is this. The old arguments that I used to make about how, Trump has an 80% chance of re-election if it's Trump versus Biden. That's out the window. That's totally out the window, because that was before COVID-19 and before an economic depression and before we saw Biden get the Biden surge among old people. So it's a whole new ballgame. It's anybody's race. And when it comes to who's going to win, right now I'm still in the same position, which is flip a coin, man. This thing is 50-50.